If AI is supposed to save the future, why does it start by devouring the power, water, and trust of the people living next to it? Because the thing everyone calls a cloud is really a factory, and once you see that, the whole conversation changes. And the real question is whether progress is being built for the public or sold to them with a patriotic label. All right, let's get into what's actually happening here. Bro, imagine waking up to a billion-dollar server farm in your backyard, and then being told it's for your own good. That pitch always sounds clean until the utility bill shows up, or the water starts acting like a luxury item. That's the part that feels so upside down. People hear AI and think software, not industrial-scale extraction. That's the scam of the framing, right? They talk like it's a cloud, but it is a factory. A factory with giant cooling demands, constant power, and no sleep. And somehow the town is supposed to clap for it. The wild part is how fast the language turns patriotic. Like if you question it, suddenly you're anti-progress. Or pro-China, apparently. That jump is always so dramatic. But that is the lever they keep pulling. They make it sound like surrender if you hesitate. Meanwhile, local people are asking basic questions. Like what happens to the water table? What happens to the grid? What happens to costs? You know, small things. Just the entire functioning of daily life. And then they show up talking about jobs, as if that settles everything. The jobs argument is so lazy sometimes, because a few construction jobs do not equal permanent community value, especially when the thing barely has people inside it. It's like praising a refrigerator for employment creation, a very expensive, noisy refrigerator. And the noise part is not even minor. People talk about 24/7 humming like it's background ambiance. But if you live next door, that becomes your whole nervous system. You don't get used to that. You just get worn down. That's what makes the rural angle so brutal. These places were sold as quiet, self-contained, stable. Then one corporate decision changes the whole sensory environment. And local government often looks tiny next to that kind of money. Tiny is generous. Yeah, they look like interns in a room full of giants. That power imbalance is the real story. Because once the land deal starts, the leverage shifts hard, and residents are left trying to decode technical jargon, which is always suspicious, by the way. If an explanation needs 12 consultants, something is off. That's a good rule for life, honestly. The surveillance piece makes it even darker, because once these systems are inside everything, who is actually watching whom? Spoiler, not the town council. Definitely not them. There is a creepy logic where infrastructure becomes visibility, and visibility becomes control. That part hits because people already don't trust big tech. Then you add employee monitoring, cybersecurity vendors, all that. It stops sounding like innovation and starts sounding like a machine for compliance. Exactly, and the public is supposed to feel lucky. Lucky to host the machine. Lucky to pay for the privilege. What gets me is the scale. Hundreds of these things are spreading while towns are still confused. That's not democratic rollout, that's invasion speed. And every company acts like the future is already settled. Like the only question is how fast locals surrender. The argument is basically, accept this or lose the AI race. That is such a convenient hostage note. A very expensive hostage note. And if the promise breaks, the losses stay local. That's the asymmetry people are finally waking up to. Profits are private, costs are public. That sentence is basically the whole episode. Drinking water, electric bills, land use, noise, trust. It all gets bundled into this shiny AI story. Shiny is doing a lot of work there, like aggressively polished. And the deeper fear is what happens when communities lose control of their own basics. Once that happens, everything else gets easier to take. So the backlash is not just anti-tech, it's anti-being steamrolled, which is a pretty reasonable instinct, honestly. Very revolutionary, wanting water and quiet. The bar is underground, completely subterranean. And maybe that's why people are reacting so hard. Because the pitch keeps getting bigger while the trust keeps getting smaller. That is a bad trade. If a town can't say no, it's not really a town anymore. It's just a site. And that is the most depressing part. You can feel why people are angry, not confused. They are not missing the upside. They are asking who actually gets to decide the downside, and who pays when the shiny thing becomes a problem. Usually not the company. Yeah, and that gap is only getting louder. I think that is why this backlash keeps growing. People can smell a lopsided deal now. They may not know the technical terms, but they know a land grab. And once that feeling sets in, good luck selling the future. That is the whole fight. The future sounds great until it shows up next door. Then suddenly your well, your bill, and your sleep are all somebody else's experiment. And the pitch is always like, trust us, this is innovation. Innovation with a giant transformer humming at midnight. What gets me is how fast these towns are told to feel lucky. Like they should be grateful a trillion-dollar company chose their cornfield. Which is hilarious, because the cornfield did not apply for the job. Exactly, and the residents are left acting like interns in their own county. That part about weak local oversight is wild to me. One board meeting and suddenly the whole town is outmatched. These are not small zoning fights when the company has armies of lawyers. The town has 3 volunteers and a binder from 2009. And a guy named Ron who knows every pothole but not data infrastructure. But honestly, Ron is the only one asking the right questions. Like, how much water does this thing actually need every day? Because once you start talking about drinking water, people wake up fast. Especially in places where the farm has been using that water for generations. Then a server farm arrives and acts like it owns the aquifer. And if the answer is, well, we will be efficient, that is not comforting. Efficient still means somebody local is carrying the risk. That is why the utility bill piece is so nasty, right? Residents hear clean power grid, but they feel price hikes first. That is the classic company move, sell the halo and invoice the neighborhood. Sell the halo is such a brutal phrase. But it is true, because everybody gets told AI will make them richer. Meanwhile, the local ratepayer is like, richer for whom exactly? And nobody can answer that without sounding slippery. The surveillance angle is even creepier, though. Because once a company is monitoring employees with outside cybersecurity tools, you start wondering about everything. It makes the whole system feel less like infrastructure and more like control. That line about the digital prison of the future is extreme, but not random. It's not even a conspiracy when the servers are literally the walls. Dude, that was almost too good to be a joke. But think about it. The same stuff powering AI is also enabling monitoring at scale. So people are not just resisting a building, they are resisting a power structure. And that is a much harder sell for the company. Because no one wants to be the town that got outmaneuvered by a logo. That's a terrible headline, by the way, but a perfect reality check. The funny part is the executives keep acting like the choice is progress or China. That is such a corporate magic trick, collapse every concern into one huge fear. Like if you question a data center, you are supposedly against civilization. That framing is so lazy because local people are not anti-tech. They are anti-being sacrificed without a conversation. And the conversation is often after the deal is basically done. Then everybody acts surprised when people start protesting at town halls. I love that chant energy, by the way, just pure neighborhood rage. Not here, not anywhere is a pretty clean summary of the mood. And the mood is changing because people now understand scale. One warehouse is one thing, but hundreds of these is a system. Once it becomes a system, every town starts seeing the same playbook. A playbook with better consultants than the county can afford. And probably a glossy slideshow with words like sustainable and resilient. Resilient always means somebody else is suffering resiliently. That is actually the core irony here. The company survives by exporting fragility. The town absorbs the strain, the company absorbs the upside. And if the grid gets stressed, suddenly everyone is sharing the blame. Which is insane when the project was never designed with the town in mind. It feels like consent is being replaced by inevitability. People are basically told this is happening, adapt. That is not consent, that is a hostage note with better branding. Okay, that is dark, but honestly, yes. And when residents push back, they get painted as emotional or uninformed. Which is funny because they are usually the only ones reading the actual documents. Do you notice how often the people closest to the land become the best analysts? Because they know what changes when trucks come through, when water drops, when noise never stops. They are not theorizing, they are noticing. That is what makes this feel so lopsided. The consequences are local, but the decisions are remote. And the money is even further away. Somewhere in a city office, someone is calling this an ecosystem play. Ecosystem play is usually code for, let's move the mess somewhere cheaper. Bro, that should be on a billboard outside these towns. But I do think this backlash is bigger than one industry. It is really about who gets to define development now. If a town cannot say no to a data center, what can it say no to? That is the scary question nobody wants to sit with. Because once the answer is nothing, democracy starts looking decorative. And people can feel when their vote is being outspent by a project. That is why the pushback has this moral anger to it. Not just NIMBY stuff, but a sense of being used. Like we were told this would be the future, not the bill. That line is actually the whole podcast in one sentence. Future, yes. Invoice, apparently also yes. And the weird part is the companies may still get what they want. Even with Backlash, they can outlast a town's attention span. That's the depressing advantage of scale. But if enough towns organize, the story changes fast. Because then this stops being a local complaint and becomes a national pattern. And corporations hate patterns when the pattern is people are not buying it. Especially when the people are farmers with receipts and patience. Yeah, and that patience is running out. Which might be the most important signal in the whole thing. That's when a sleepy town turns into a political problem. Because nobody wakes up wanting a fight with Microsoft or Meta. Then suddenly your driveway is a battleground and your well is in the argument. That's such a brutal sentence, honestly. And it's always sold as progress, which is the funniest part. Progress for whom is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. The crazy thing is these projects sound clean from far away. Then you get close and it's water use, power draw, and non-stop noise. So basically, a giant invisible factory with a very visible bill. And somehow the bill keeps landing on the same people. That's what makes residents furious, not just the buildings themselves. It's the feeling that decisions already happened without them. Right. And by the time they notice, the permits are moving. Local democracy speed-running its own funeral. That's awful, but yes, that is the vibe. And tech companies know most towns are under-equipped to fight back. They have lawyers, consultants, and giant budgets. The town has one angry meeting and a handshake with reality. Meanwhile, the pitch is always about jobs, jobs, jobs. But these data centers don't employ the kind of people they displace. That's the other weird thing. The labor story is tiny. $1 billion box and like 12 permanent jobs. You said it like that, not me. And yet the land, water, and power requirements are enormous. So the footprint is giant, but the local upside is thin. That's why people start calling it extraction instead of investment. Because it does feel like resources getting pulled out of a place. And the place is left holding the consequences. What gets me is how fast the surveillance angle gets normalized. Once you build the infrastructure for these giant systems, monitoring follows. They always say it's cybersecurity, efficiency, safety, all that. The holy trinity of corporate explanations. That's actually perfect, annoyingly perfect. But the fear isn't imaginary when companies track workers and communication, especially when they already have systems watching everything move. It becomes easy to imagine a town wired into a giant machine. And people are not crazy for hating that feeling. No, because nobody wants to feel like a tenant in their own county. The water issue might be the most visceral part of all this. You can argue economics, but you cannot bluff a well. That's a great line and terrifying. If people think their drinking water is at risk, that conversation is over. And tech companies keep acting shocked that folks are upset. Like, yes, rural communities are famously thrilled by industrial sprawl. The weirdest part is the moral confidence of the executives. They talk like resistance is just ignorance catching up late. But residents are not dumb, they're just being steamrolled. And once people see the pattern, they stop treating it as isolated. That's when the whole national conversation gets spicy. Spicy is polite. This thing gets confrontational fast. Because it connects local life to national priorities in a nasty way. Everyone wants AI, but nobody wants the turbine next door. Everybody loves the app, nobody loves the substation. That's exactly it. The fantasy is frictionless intelligence with somebody else paying friction. And that's where the backlash has teeth. Because the people paying are not abstract, they're right there. They're checking utility bills, hearing the hum, watching trucks roll in. And then they ask the obvious thing, why here? And the answer is usually, because here is easier. Which is a horrifying business model when you say it out loud. It also exposes how weak the public bargaining position really is. Like, do towns actually get a real choice here? Often not. Not in any meaningful sense. The choice is packaged after the land, money, and influence are lined up. So the vote is basically a vibe check. A very expensive vibe check with lawyers. But if enough people keep fighting, the vibe changes. And once one town wins, the next town gets braver. That's how these things stop feeling inevitable. Meanwhile, the industry is praying everyone stays tired, because exhaustion is their best ally. Still, I can't shake the irony of all this AI talk. We keep hearing intelligence, progress, abundance, but the local story is scarcity. Scarcity of water, scarcity of trust, scarcity of control. Plenty of server racks, though. Of course, abundance where nobody asked for it. That mismatch is why this backlash feels bigger than one industry fight. It's about who gets to decide what development means, and whether communities are partners or just terrain. That's the line people are refusing now. Honestly, good for them. Because if they don't draw it, nobody else will. And once the country sees that, this gets a lot bigger. Bigger, messier, and way less polite. And that is exactly why the tech people keep sounding so confident. They talk like the choice is obvious and everyone else is just slow. Meanwhile, the town is staring at a giant warehouse and a higher electric bill. That's the part they keep skating past. Like, if my water changes, who exactly is celebrating the innovation? The shareholders, probably not the farmer next door. And that's where the whole thing gets ugly fast. Because rural communities are not begging for a mystery factory. They're being told this is progress after the deal is already moving. That timing is so insulting. It is basically, trust us, the bulldozers are therapeutic. Yeah, very healing machinery. But I do get why companies push so hard. If AI becomes infrastructure, the winner gets absurd power. Not just money, but leverage over everything downstream. That's the part that feels bigger than servers. It is energy, water, land, and then data on top. So the farm is just the first visible sacrifice. And the invisible ones are probably worse. Like, people hear data center and think harmless cloud stuff. Cute little clouds, massive industrial appetite. Exactly, very decorative apocalypse energy. And then you realize these places need constant power and cooling, which means the local grid becomes part of the product. And residents somehow become the backup system. That's the scammy feeling people are reacting to. Not necessarily fraud, just extraction with better branding. Extractive, but make it mission-driven. And the surveillance angle makes it even creepier. Because once you hear about employee monitoring tools, the vibe changes. Suddenly, it is not about productivity, it is about obedience. That is exactly why people distrust the whole stack. The machine is not just processing your photos anymore. It is shaping workplace behavior, city politics, and probably law enforcement too. And once that bundle exists, good luck pulling it apart. That is the real monopoly fear. Not just one company getting big, but one ecosystem getting unavoidable. Like, you can't opt out if the whole region depends on it. Exactly, that's power without needing to say the word power. The most polite takeover ever. And the locals are left fighting zoning meetings like it's a last stand. Which is honestly wild because they are usually outgunned from the start. The hearing format itself feels designed to make them lose. 3 minutes to explain your drinking water is not enough. Especially when some consultant has a slideshow and a tie. And the company has already done the math on delay versus consent. If they can wait out the outrage, they win. Outrage is expensive for regular people. It takes time off work, legal fees, public attention, all of it. The town gets stress, the corporation gets patience. That's annoyingly well put. And the crazy thing is, they still sell this as community development. Like, yes, 100 construction jobs now, and what after that? A sealed building with a tiny permanent staff and giant utility needs. That trade starts looking bad when you say it out loud, especially if the tax breaks are huge. Then the public is subsidizing the very thing stressing the public. That is some premium circular logic. And then people wonder why resentment turns into backlash. Because it is not anti-tech to ask who eats the cost. It's basic self-defense. Especially when the costs are water, power, and control. And the scary part is how normal it could all become. A few hundred of these sites, then 1,000, then nobody remembers the fight. People just accept noisy horizons and weaker local power as the price. That is how these things settle in. Not with one dramatic moment, but with exhaustion. Bureaucratic erosion, the sexiest kind of erosion. Exactly, the least glamorous catastrophe. But the pushback matters because it interrupts that drift. It forces people to say the quiet part out loud. Development is not automatically good if the community absorbs the damage. That should not be a radical sentence. Yet here we are acting shocked by accountability. And honestly, the more the pitch sounds inevitable, the more suspicious I get. Because why does inevitability always seem to benefit the same people? Funny how destiny keeps a cap table. That's a nasty line, but it's true. If anything, this is a fight over who the future is built for. And whether small towns get a vote before the future arrives, that is the whole argument, really. Not machines versus humans, just power versus people on the ground. And the reason it lands so hard is because people can feel the imbalance. They do not need a policy memo to know they are being squeezed. Water bills have a way of explaining themselves. Exactly, and that is why this backlash is spreading. Once one town says no, everybody else starts paying attention. Then the entire pitch gets harder to sell. Because now the question is not, can you build it? It is, can you build it without taking the place apart? And that is a much tougher question.